Good morning, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving 2022. It is currently 6:08 a.m. and I've found myself in Tampa. Why, you might be asking? Well, if you read the video title or whatever I've decided to make this, we're going to be chasing L700 today. The Bradenton local that handles the Tropicana reefers in and out of the plant in Bradenton. We're going to be chasing him south from Tampa today because, well, we don't eat dinner until the afternoon, and it came to my attention a couple days prior that he was going to have a bunch of Tropicana reefers this morning. If you recall, back in June, we actually chased the train for this reason when he had 33 reefers and a particular lack of presence in Cryotrans leased reefers. Today's going to be the same. I'm just going to spoil it now because I don't feel like keeping this a secret till later down the road. He should have 46 reefers total today, and only 2 of those should be Cryotrans, if the numbers are staying right that I counted. So we're currently waiting on him to leave now. Like I said, it's just after 6 a.m. And he's also, interesting point, CSX's new website livery paint scheme that has been going on to some of their new rebuilt locomotives and even some of their older ones has actually made it on to one of their wide cab GE-9s, which is going to be leading today's L700, and it's like factory fresh paint. I've only seen it over online rail cams, but I have a feeling that when it comes into some of the Tampa street lights that we're gonna like what we see. So let's get going here. By this point, I had been watching them build their train out of the yard for about half an hour, and our consist already looked promising. So by about 6:25, I had moved around the corner to TS, the site of the former TS crossing between the Atlantic Coastline and Seaboard Airlines when those two companies were here. Nowadays, it's the southern exit to Yeoman Yard and the beginning of the Tampa Terminal Subdivision to the south, where the Palmetto Subdivision will take the train to Bradenton starting around Apollo Beach. Our train would stop just short of the signals and contact dispatch to get their track authority or permission to use the Palmetto Subdivision down to Bradenton.
Hey, Brown, 9001. Stop by Manatee, AZA 906.10. 91650, 91650, 112422, TSA 41.0. L700 24, 9001, Brown, circle line 180, main track, south direction. Get AS East Tampa on the main. AZA 916.8 on the main. Circle line 11, okay, on the switch, AZA 906.10.
CSX number 9001 would be the leader for today's train, having just rolled out of the Waycross, Georgia paint booth only 2 or 3 days prior with this new paint scheme on the side. Our promising train rolls out of Yeoman Yard southbound, but not without a couple of additions because this is simply a local nowadays and no longer the unit Tropicana juice train. Alongside some miscellaneous freight for Bradenton, some Palmetto-bound rock hoppers would be found in today's consist. While not seen too often, L700 does deliver rock hoppers to Palmetto on seldom occasion, but they wouldn't be doing that today. They'd simply be taking them to a spot further south to drop them along the way. With me leaving TS before the end of the train and it being 6:40 Thanksgiving morning, there would be almost nobody on the road, making for a quite relaxing drive to Gibsonton where I'd set up next. The reason L700 gets that EC1 authority before taking the train to Bradenton is because the line between East Tampa and the 916.8 milepost is all dark territory. So the dispatcher can't see what's going on his screen in that stretch of track on the system. So only one train will be allowed to use that stretch of track at one time. So that dispatch issued message was basically code for L724 with this crew going this direction should be the only train on the Palmetto subdivision between East Tampa and milepost AZA 916.8. No other train will be allowed to use that stretch of track until L700 releases the authority back to dispatch. By the dawn's early light, or in today's case, the dawn's reduced sight, a thick fog had set in by the time our train had gotten across the Alafaya River. Though personally, I feel as though the fog added a sort of eerie tone and amplified the train's length, which was of interest this morning because of how uncommon it is to see a train this big nowadays of Tropicana cars headed home to Bradenton. Between the gradual decline in the consumption of citrus juices globally and the changes that CSX has made in how they get these cars from point A to point B, Tropicana consists like this one have seemingly gotten shorter and shorter over the past 4 to 5 years. Additionally, and perhaps ironically, is how Tropicana is supposedly at a shortage of their own rolling stock. And so, as likely a cheaper alternative to buying new ones, they lease out those cryo-trans reefers, which, don't get me wrong, get the job done without a doubt, but don't exactly look natural, at least to me, rolling with the rest of Tropicana's fleet. And those cars don't promote the corporate image of Tropicana at all. So in a day and age where you can sometimes get more of those cars on Tropicana's own trains, seeing a train like this of so many Tropicana pieces was certainly a refreshing catch and almost served as a reminder to my past, where I could see trains like this on the Palmetto sub that were this long or longer every day. I began to reconnect with the head of the train by the time we were rolling through Apollo Beach, and another 5 miles south and we're in downtown Ruskin, where the fog has really set in now. Though still with a lazy attitude this morning, not a lot of people out on the road. It just makes it easier for me. Just one of many things that I could say I am very thankful for today. I'd like to say that for the most part, both me and this train crew would have an easy morning. So I'd ease off as I came into the sleepy town of Sun City. Heavy the fog would still be as we rolled into Port Manatee, and the train would have a stop to make here. Oh yeah, almost forgot. Can't see one of these trains without celebrating, right? Just like last time. Still pretty good. Walmart only had no pulp though. Not my favorite, but it works. You might recall in their EC1 authority message that they had a reference to milepost AZA 906.1. This was dispatch giving L700 permission to throw the switch at that milepost. The switch in question there is the access from the main line to the Port Manatee yard. This would be so that L700 could drop some cars in the yard here before continuing to Bradenton. Another characteristic of dark territory lines is that because dispatch can't see what's going on, any switches off the main line trains must have permission to use, and such switches will be mentioned in their EC1 authorities.
Off here at 9001, at about 4.
The dump of air pressure comes from the crew separating from the train at the other end so they can drop a few cars in the Port Manatee yard. And standing at the very end of this train, looking down the giant line of reefers into the fog is, well, like I said before, an eerie sense of feeling. I'd moved south of the yard to Piney Point Road to watch the crew from the ground switch the yard, though I'd have to put the drone in the air to see what they were really doing. The crew would be dropping those Palmetto-bound rock hoppers in the yard here.
They'll leave them here likely for train L783 that I covered in a recent video to pick up here and then deliver to Palmetto. I can only assume that it was easier or more efficient to bring the cars down here to Port Manatee Yard instead of taking them out of the Bradenton-bound consist back at the yard in Tampa. A simple set of back and forth maneuvers would get those hoppers out of their consist, and by putting the train back together into one piece, stretching into the fog, they're ready to head south. Destination, Tropicana Yard, Bradenton. From here on south, the train would begin to drop into the lowlands of the Big Manatee River, and we'd follow them southward to the outskirts of Palmetto, and a little bit of backstreet driving would bring me down to Sutton Road. And on this cool November morning, the crew's getting a fresh breeze through the cab by leaving the cab door wide open. The open door policy as it's referenced, and although some rail fans tend to not like when crews do this, personally I find it makes for a unique look, and I think it's very cool. Now fully into the lowlands, I'd choose the southern banks of the Big Manatee River to catch the train next. The iconic Manatee River Walk would provide an equally iconic perspective on our train as it comes across the giant span of the river. The drawbridge that opens and closes on it being almost 100 years old. An original coastline installation, and I can't tell you the last time that I've been able to stand here and see a train like ours today that stretches the entire span of the river. And mind you, our train is pulling almost all Tropicana stock today.
Well, what an interesting morning this has been. Successful chase without a doubt. That 9001 looks sharp in that paint. Only gonna have that shine for a few weeks though. That right-of-way grime is gonna get all up in there and make it look a little rusty. Anyhow, we made it to Bradenton, and well, this morning when I said there were 46 reefers, right? If my numbers were still correct, yeah, they're not. I realized that they either didn't take all of, or they took more cars than I knew were going, so I'm gonna have to recount what was actually on today's train and give you a car count when I edit this, but we all made it to Bradenton, so let's see what they got to do.
What they had to do wasn't much, but how they did it was rather interesting. If you've watched videos like this one of mine before, you might notice something off about this scene. Usually they'd bring the L700 consist down to the yard via this set of tracks on the right, before shoving the consist back into the yard and breaking it up within the yard. Though such wouldn't be the case today, and they'd have to bring the train in via what I like to call the pass track, and leave the consist there after breaking it apart in two spots to clear a couple of road crossings. This would be because Tropicana Yard at this time was full to the brim with reefer cars. This aerial view gives you a pretty good idea of how many cars were there that morning. I'll say this and just this, as an avid Tropicana fan, I haven't seen this yard this full in at least 3.5 years. Maybe I've missed a few occasions in the past, but this was insane. Of course, it's a mixture of Tropicana and Cryo Train's leased stock, but still, I haven't seen it this full in so long. And on top of all these cars, they had 46 more cars coming down on our southbound train today, and they didn't have any room for them in the yard, so they had to leave them out here. So this morning's crew had no yarding duties to complete. It would simply be bringing the train into Bradenton, separating it for the road crossings, taking the engines off, and pulling them south. Thanksgiving would treat this crew pretty well today. It was all light work because in addition to all of the no yarding duties, they didn't have anything to take back north either. No train would be leaving Bradenton. These guys would literally throw this switch and run these two engines back to Tampa on their own. Back across the Riverwalk in the Big Manatee River, L700's crew would have an easy run down and an easy run back. The nose light of 9001 would end my morning though, as I've seen what I wanted, and with the crew headed back to Tampa, this was enough of me following them around for today. Besides, by the time the afternoon rolled around, dinner would have been ready and I would have had to be home for that. You never want to miss quality time with family, especially mine. I do appreciate you joining me this morning trackside though via this YouTube video, and I hope you enjoyed it fairly thoroughly. It was a pretty nice morning for myself, and to everyone watching, I wish a happy belated Thanksgiving. Thanks again for joining me, and on the Palmetto Subdivision at milepost AZA 916.6, this is Kotabeaner, and I'll see you somewhere out there on the Sunshine State Rails.